I am dying, but they will not let me die. My name was Brother Sergeant Caney of the Iron Hands, and I believed that death in service to the Emperor was the greatest honor a Space Marine could achieve. I was wrong. What they did to me instead is a fate that makes death look like a mercy, a punishment that will never end, not even when the stars themselves burn out. This is the horrifying life of a Hellbrute. The battle on Istvan V had turned into a slaughter. We fought alongside our brother legions against the traitor Warmaster, our bolters speaking the Emperor's justice with every thunderous round. I led my tactical squad through the killing fields, our armor bearing the silver and black of our Primarch Ferrus Manus. The enemy fell before us like wheat before the scythe, and for a moment I believed we would win this day. Then the world exploded around me. The shell hit our position without warning. One moment I stood among my brothers, calling out targets and coordinating fire patterns. The next moment I was flying through the air, my body tumbling like a child's toy thrown by an angry giant. I hit the ground hard enough to crack ceramite, and when I tried to stand, my legs would not respond. I looked down and saw why. Everything below my waist was simply gone, taken by the explosion that had ended my life as surely as a bolt round to the skull. The pain came next, a wave of agony so complete that it drove all thought from my mind. My enhanced physiology kept me conscious when a normal human would have died from shock alone. I could hear my own screaming, the sound raw and animal in my ears. Around me lay the scattered remains of my squad, brothers I had fought beside for decades reduced to broken meat and shattered armor. I tried to activate my Voxcaster to call for an apothecary, but the unit had been destroyed along with most of my backplate. I lay there watching the sky turn red with fire and knew that I was dying. My twin hearts beat frantically, trying to pump blood that was no longer contained within my body. My vision began to fade at the edges, darkness creeping in like a tide I could not hold back. I whispered the Emperor's name and prepared for the journey to his side, ready to stand among the honored dead who had given everything in his service. Then I heard the voices. They were not the voices of my brothers or the apothecaries who should have been searching for survivors. They spoke in tones that made my skin crawl, words that seemed to bypass my ears and scratch directly against the inside of my skull. I forced my failing eyes to focus and saw figures approaching through the smoke and ruin. They wore armor I recognized, the colors of the Death Guard Legion who had fought alongside us just hours before. But something was wrong. Their armor bore symbols I had never seen, marks that hurt to look at directly. Their movements were strange, purposeful in a way that spoke of dark intention rather than rescue. The leader bent down, beside me, his helmet decorated with brass symbols that seemed to writhe in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the concern a brother should show for a dying comrade. "This one still lives," he said to his companions. "His body is ruined, but his gene seed remains pure. The Dark Mechanicum will be pleased." I tried to speak, to ask what he meant, but my voice came out as a wet gurgle. Blood filled my throat, and I could feel my consciousness slipping away despite my enhanced biology's desperate attempt to keep me functional. The Death Guard Marine produced a device I did not recognize, its surface covered in the same painful symbols that decorated his armor. He pressed it against my chest, and I felt a jolt of energy that drove back the darkness threatening to claim me. The pain that had been fading suddenly returned in full force. My ruined body screamed in protest as whatever foul technology he had used forced my systems back to full awareness. I could feel every severed nerve, every broken bone, every torn organ with terrible clarity. I wanted to beg him to stop, to let me die with what dignity remained, but my voice would not obey my commands. "Load him with the others," the Marine said, gesturing to his squad. "The betrayal is complete, and we sail for the Eye within the hour. The Dark Mechanicum needs fresh materials for their work." Betrayal. The word cut through my pain-fogged mind like a knife. What betrayal? We had come to Istvan to put down traitors, not to join them. But as they lifted my broken body and carried me toward a transport I had not seen before, I began to understand the horrifying truth. The Death Guard had not come to help. They had turned against the Emperor just as the War Master had. And now, I was their prisoner. The transport's interior was dark and wet, the walls running with fluids I could not identify. Other wounded Marines lay strapped to tables, their bodies as ruined as my own. Some still wore the colors of loyal legions. Others bore the marks of companies I recognized as having stood with us against the traitor forces. All of them were dying, kept alive by the same foul technology that prevented my own death. A figure moved between the tables, its form hidden beneath robes that seemed to be made of living skin. When it leaned over me, I saw that its face was a mass of mechanical parts and exposed muscle, human features twisted into something that should not exist. "Good specimens," it said in a voice like grinding metal. "Strong gene seed, robust physiology, sufficient mass for integration. Yes, these will serve the project well." I tried to ask what project, what integration, but the thing placed a clawed hand over my mouth. Its touch burned like acid, and I felt my flesh beginning to blister where it made contact. "Save your strength, Loyalist. You will need it for what comes next. The pain of your wounds is nothing compared to the agony of rebirth." The transport lurched into motion, and I felt the familiar sensation of acceleration. We were leaving the surface, abandoning the battle that still raged below. Through a viewport, I could see Istvan V falling away, its surface scarred with the marks of orbital bombardment and mass slaughter. Entire legions were being wiped out down there, loyal space marines cut down by brothers who had turned traitor. And I could do nothing but watch as we climbed toward orbit and whatever dark fate awaited us. The transition to warp space hit like a physical blow. Reality twisted around us, and I felt my consciousness being pulled in directions that should not exist. The other wounded Marines began to scream, their voices joining mine in a chorus of agony that seemed to feed something hungry in the darkness beyond our ship. The robed figure moved among us with terrible purpose, injecting substances into our bodies that burned like liquid fire through our veins. Time lost all meaning in the warp. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days, days like years. I remained conscious through it all, unable to sleep, unable to escape into the mercy of unconsciousness. The foul technology keeping me alive would not permit even that small relief. I could feel my body beginning to change, my flesh knitting together in ways that felt fundamentally wrong. New organs grew where none should exist. My bones fused and reformed into shapes that had nothing to do with human anatomy. The screaming never stopped. It came from the other prisoners, from things I could not see moving in the shadows of our prison, from my own throat until my voice gave out, and still I continued to scream without sound. The robed figures worked ceaselessly, cutting and rebuilding, removing and installing, transforming us into something that was no longer entirely space marine and not yet entirely machine. When the ship finally dropped out of warp space, I had been awake for what felt like months. Every nerve in my reconstructed body sang with constant pain, a symphony of agony that had no beginning and promised no end. The robed figures, I now knew them as dark mechanicum magi, servants of the dark gods who had mastered the fusion of flesh and demon-touched machinery, unstrapped me from the table and dragged me toward a chamber I had not seen before. The chamber contained a sarcophagus, but it was nothing like the honored tombs I had seen given to fallen dreadnought brothers in my legion. This thing was alive, its surface crawling with veins that pulsed with unnatural light. Faces pressed against the metal from the inside, screaming silently as they tried to escape whatever horror contained them. Spikes jutted from every surface, each one positioned to pierce flesh in the most painful way possible. "Your new body awaits," the lead Magos said, its voice filled with something that might have been pride in its terrible work. "You will be reborn as a Hellbrute, a living weapon in service to the true gods. Your pain will be eternal. Your rage will be endless, and you will know no peace until the universe itself dies. I tried to fight as they lifted me toward the sarcophagus, but my ruined body would not respond. My limbs had been rebuilt, but they no longer obeyed my commands. The dark mechanicum had seen to that, installing controls that made me a puppet dancing on strings I could not cut. They forced me into the sarcophagus, and I felt the spikes drive through my flesh, each one finding nerves that screamed in protest. The interior walls pressed against me from all sides, covered in symbols that burned my skin where they made contact. I could feel something else inside the tomb with me, a presence that was not physical but pressed against my mind like hands trying to pry open my skull. It whispered promises of power and threats of torment in a language I had never learned but somehow understood. The Magi began their ritual, and I felt my body fusing with the sarcophagus. Metal flowed into my flesh like water, becoming part of me in ways that violated every law of nature and sanity. My arms became weapon mounts, massive guns that I could feel as clearly as I had once felt my own hands. My legs merged with the tomb systems, becoming pistons and actuators that would carry me into battle whether I willed it or not. My spine fused with control systems that connected directly to my brain, creating pathways for pain that had no limit and no end. And through it all, I remained awake. This was the true horror that separated Hellbrutes from dreadnoughts. The honored ancients of the Loyalist legions were granted the mercy of sleep between battles, their consciousness allowed to rest in dreams or simple darkness. But we who had been claimed by chaos were permitted no such escape. The demonic essence fused into our prisons kept us eternally aware, eternally conscious, eternally suffering. Every moment stretched into infinity, every second of pain multiplied across time that had lost all meaning. The transformation was complete, but the agony had only begun. I existed now as something that should not be. A consciousness trapped inside a prison of flesh and metal and demon essence, all fused into a single screaming whole. The warpsmiths of the Traitor Legion disconnected me from the Magi's ritual machinery, and I felt my new body respond to commands I did not give. Massive legs lifted me upright, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through systems that registered sensation in ways my original nervous system never could. I tried to speak and heard a sound like grinding metal, and tortured screams pour from vox speakers that had replaced my mouth. Time had no meaning in the warp. The ship that carried me existed in a space between spaces where seconds could be centuries and years could pass in a heartbeat. I remained conscious through every impossible moment, unable to sleep, unable to fade into unconsciousness, unable to escape the constant awareness of what I had become. The pain never stopped. It flowed through my reconstructed body like blood, a living thing that fed on my suffering and grew stronger with each passing moment. The spikes that had pierced my flesh when they sealed me in this tomb remained embedded in my organs, shifting and moving with every motion I made, ensuring that agony remained my only constant companion. But worse than the physical pain was the voice. It had started as a whisper during my entombment, a presence at the edge of my thoughts that I had tried to ignore. Now it spoke with clarity that cut through my mind like a blade, words that bypassed my ears and carved themselves directly into my consciousness. It did not speak in Gothic or any language I had learned as a space marine. Instead, it communicated in concepts and emotions, feelings that translated themselves into meaning without the need for words. The voice offered relief. It promised that if I would simply stop fighting, if I would surrender control of this body we now shared, the pain would become manageable. Not gone, never gone, but reduced to something less than the screaming horror that consumed my every waking moment. I refused. I was Brother Sergeant Caney of the Iron Hands, a loyal servant of the Emperor, and I would not give this demon thing the satisfaction of my surrender. But with each hour that passed, with each wave of fresh agony that crashed over me, that refusal became harder to maintain. The ship emerged from the warp above a world I did not recognize. Through sensors I did not ask to use, I saw a planet wrapped in chains of metal and covered in foundries that belched smoke into a poisoned sky. This was a forge world, but not one that served the Imperium. The symbols carved into its surface spoke of devotion to the dark mechanicum, tech priests who had abandoned the Emperor's light in favor of knowledge that should never be sought. The warpsmiths activated my motor systems, and I found myself walking toward a drop pod without choosing to move. My body responded to their commands while my consciousness remained a passenger, able to observe but unable to control. The drop pod carried me and 3 other Hellbrutes toward the planet's surface. I could hear them through Vox channels that connected our prisons. Their voices a mixture of screaming, laughing, and begging that never ceased. One of them had been entombed so long that his words no longer formed coherent sentences. Just a stream of curses and prayers mixed together into a sound that hurt to hear. Another wept constantly, calling out names I assumed belonged to brothers or family from a life so distant it might as well have never existed. The third was silent, but I could feel something watching me through our connection. Something that had once been human but had long since given up any claim to that identity. We hit the surface with impact force that would have killed a normal human and badly injured even a space marine. I felt nothing from the crash itself. The pain that already consumed me was so complete that additional damage registered only as a change in the symphony of agony, a new instrument joining an orchestra that had never stopped playing. The pod doors exploded outward, and I found my legs carrying me into a landscape of twisted metal and burning promethium. The warpsmiths had given us our first mission to clear a path through enemy defenses so their forces could advance into the forge complex ahead. The enemy was a force of Drukhari, dark Eldar raiders who had come to steal whatever secrets this corrupt forge world held. They opened fire as we emerged from our pods, their weapons crackling with dark energy that splashed across my armor like rain. I felt each hit as a point of burning cold against my metal shell, my sensors registering damage in ways that translated to pain receptors that should not exist. My arms, no longer arms but weapon mounts fused to my shoulders, responded without my command. Heavy bolters that formed part of my body began firing, the recoil slamming through my frame with each shot, adding to the constant hurt that defined my existence. I wanted to stop. I wanted to refuse to fight for the traitors who had done this to me, but my body would not obey my will. The warpsmiths had installed control systems that made me their puppet, a weapon they could aim and fire without concern for what remained of my consciousness. I watched through eyes that were now optical sensors as my guns tore through the dark Eldar lines, their bodies exploding under the impact of mass reactive shells. I felt nothing at their deaths. The capacity for satisfaction or remorse had been burned out of me by endless pain, leaving only the mechanical observation of targets eliminated and threats neutralized. Then something changed. A dark Eldar warrior armed with a power lance charged toward me, its weapon crackling with energy designed to pierce even the thickest armor. The warpsmith's control systems registered the threat and moved my body to counter, but something else responded faster. The voice in my head, the presence I had been fighting since my entombment, surged forward with terrible force. I felt it take control of my limbs, and suddenly I was no longer a passenger watching my body fight. I was a prisoner locked away in a corner of my own mind while something else drove my form like a stolen vehicle. The rage that flooded through me was not mine. It belonged to the demon essence fused into my prison, a fury so pure and absolute that it burned away thought and left only the desire to kill. My power fist, a weapon I had not consciously activated, swept out with speed that should have been impossible for something my size. It caught the dark Eldar warrior mid-charge and crushed its body into paste, armor and flesh and bone compressed into a smear of organic matter that dripped from my fingers. But the killing did not stop there. I turned on the nearest targets and found that some of them wore the corrupt symbols of the chaos forces I supposedly served. Cultists who had been advancing behind our assault line suddenly found themselves in my path, and the thing controlling my body made no distinction between friend and enemy. It killed because killing was all it knew, a force of pure destruction that cared nothing for tactics or strategy or even basic survival. I felt my weapons firing in all directions, my fist crushing anything that came within reach, my legs carrying me through friendly and enemy positions alike in a rampage that painted the battlefield red. The warpsmiths tried to reassert control, their commands screaming through the Vox channels in an attempt to shut down my motor systems. But whatever had taken over my body ignored their orders completely. It fed on the violence, growing stronger with each kill, pushing my consciousness further into the dark corners of my own mind. I could only watch as my hands that had once been used to help my brothers and serve the Emperor, tore cultists apart like a child ripping paper. Their screams meant nothing to the thing controlling me. Their pleas for mercy were ignored as thoroughly as my own internal cries for this horror to end. When I finally came back to myself, I stood in a crater of my own making. Bodies lay scattered around me in pieces, some wearing the armor of dark Eldar raiders, others dressed in the robes of chaos cultists who had fought on the same side I was supposed to serve. My weapons still smoked from firing, heat shimmer rising from barrels that had discharged so many rounds they glowed red in the dim light. I tried to remember what had happened, to recall the moments of the rampage, but found only fragments. Images of violence seen through a red haze that had nothing to do with my own vision. The voice in my head withdrew, pulling back to whatever corner of my prison it occupied when not in control. I could feel it there, satisfied in a way that made my skin crawl, pleased with the destruction it had caused through my body. The other Hellbrutes stood at a distance, their postures suggesting wariness even though we were all supposedly on the same side. The one who had been silent earlier spoke for the first time, its voice crackling through the Vox with tones that suggested amusement. "First frenzy is always the worst," it said, each word accompanied by sounds that might have been laughter or sobbing. "You will learn to feel it coming, to sense when the other wants to play. Not that knowing helps. Nothing helps. Welcome to forever, brother." The other. The name fit the presence in my head, the thing that shared this prison and waited for opportunities to seize control. I wanted to ask how long the silent Hellbrute had been entombed, how many times it had experienced these episodes of lost control, but the warpsmiths were already transmitting new orders. The path was clear, and we were to return to the transport for the next deployment. My legs began walking without my permission, and I was once again a passenger in my own body. The missions continued, one blending into another until I could no longer track how many battles I had fought or how much time had passed. The warp made chronology meaningless anyway. Days could pass in what felt like minutes or stretch into eternities of subjective experience. I remained awake through all of it. My consciousness never permitted the mercy of sleep or even unconsciousness. The demon essence fused into my systems ensured that I experienced every moment of my existence with terrible clarity. Between battles, I was stored in a chamber deep within the ship, a hold filled with other Hellbrutes in various states of functionality. Some stood silent and unmoving, their occupants perhaps lost to madness or death, though I suspected death was not permitted to claim us any more than sleep was. Others moved restlessly, their weapons twitching and their legs shifting as whatever remained of their consciousnesses fought battles that existed only in their tortured minds. The constant noise of their suffering created a symphony of horror that never ceased, screaming and weeping and laughing and begging all mixed together into a sound that would have driven a normal human insane within minutes. It was here that I first had a conversation with another Hellbrute who retained enough coherence to respond. The machine next to my storage position bore marks of incredible age, its armor scarred by weapons that had not been used in millennia. Its frame modified and rebuilt so many times that almost nothing of its original construction remained. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of time beyond measure. each word carefully formed as if language itself had become something foreign and difficult. "You still fight it," the ancient Hellbrute said during one of the rare moments when the cacophony of suffering quieted enough for conversation. "I can hear you struggling against the controls, refusing the other's offers, clinging to whatever memories you think make you who you were. I did the same once, a very long time ago." I tried to respond but found that forming words through my Vox speakers required concentration I struggled to maintain. The constant pain made thought difficult, like trying to solve equations while being burned alive. Finally, I managed to force out a question that had haunted me since my entombment. "How long?" I asked, the words emerging as a grinding rasp. "How long have you been like this?" The ancient Hellbrute was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough that I thought it might have retreated into whatever passed for its thoughts. Then it spoke again, its tone suggesting something that might once have been sadness but had been worn smooth by ages of suffering. "I was there when Horus first turned against the Emperor," it said. "I fought in the initial battles of the heresy as a loyal son of my legion. I died defending a position that no longer has a name on a world that was destroyed so long ago that even the warp has forgotten it existed. The Dark Mechanicum found me and did to me what they did to you. That was 10,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries. Time is hard to track when you never sleep, and the warp makes hours into years and years into moments. 10,000 years, the number was too large to comprehend. A span of time so vast that my mind refused to accept it. But I looked at the ancient Hellbrute's scarred frame and knew it spoke truth. This thing had been suffering in its prison since before the Imperium fell into the darkness that defined it now, had remained conscious and aware through millennia of agony that should have destroyed any mind. The horror of that realization struck me with force that eclipsed even my physical pain. "Does it get easier?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken. The ancient Hellbrute made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could sound like breaking glass and tearing metal. "No," it said simply. "It gets worse. Each year you lose more of what you were. Memories fade faster than a dreadnought's because the demon corruption actively eats them, consumes the parts of your brain that hold your identity and replaces them with rage and hunger. Your name will become meaningless, your legion forgotten, your very face lost to you. But you will remain aware through all of it, conscious of every moment of your decline. That is the gift chaos gives us, eternal awareness of our own destruction." I wanted to refuse its words, to insist that I would retain my identity no matter how long this torment lasted. But I had already noticed the changes beginning in my own mind. Faces of my squad brothers had started to blur in my memory, their names slipping away when I tried to recall them. The sound of my own voice, my real voice before it had been replaced by mechanical approximation, had become uncertain in my recollection. Even my Primarch's face had grown hazy, his features fading like a painting left too long in the sun. "There is one mercy," the ancient Hellbrute continued, its voice taking on a tone I could not identify. "The other in your head, the demon presence that shares your prison, it will eventually offer you a bargain. Merge with it completely, let it consume what remains of your identity, and the pain becomes manageable. You lose yourself but gain relief from the suffering. Many take that offer. Most take it eventually. I have watched thousands of our kind make that choice over the centuries." "Did you?" I asked, though I feared the answer. The ancient Hellbrute's weapons twitched in a gesture that might have been the equivalent of a shrug. "I am still here talking to you, so you know I have not merged completely, but I am close, so very close. The other and I have conversations now, negotiations about who controls what and when. We share memories sometimes, its existence bleeding into mine until I cannot remember if certain events happened to me or to it. Soon there will be no distinction. Soon I will take the offer, and whatever I once was will cease to exist entirely. I tell you this as a warning, young one. Never stop fighting for your mind. It is all you have left, and once you give it away, there is nothing remaining that could be called you. Our conversation ended when the warpsmiths activated my systems for another deployment. As my legs carried me toward the drop pods, I thought about the ancient Hellbrute's warnings. 10,000 years of consciousness, of constant pain, of watching yourself fade away piece by piece while remaining aware of every loss. The horror of it threatened to break whatever remained of my sanity. The ancient Hellbrute's words haunted me through the battles that followed, each deployment bringing fresh evidence of the truth it had spoken. I could feel myself changing in ways that went beyond the physical transformation they had forced upon me. My thoughts became harder to form, simple concepts requiring effort that should have been automatic. Memories that had once been clear and immediate now arrived late and distorted, like trying to remember a dream hours after waking. The daemon presence in my prison, the other that waited for its chance to seize control, grew stronger with each passing engagement while I grew weaker. I began having conversations with it during the endless hours between battles when I stood locked in the storage chamber, surrounded by the screaming of my fellow Hellbrutes. At first I tried to resist, to maintain the silence that would keep us separate, but the isolation was worse than the pain. The other was the only thing that shared my prison, the only entity that understood exactly what this existence meant. So I started to speak to it, and it answered with enthusiasm that should have warned me of the danger. The other did not have a name, not in any sense I could understand. It was a fragment of something larger, a piece of demon essence torn from the warp and bound into my sarcophagus during the ritual that had transformed me. It existed as pure emotion, rage, and hunger, and the desire to destroy distilled into a consciousness that had never known anything else. When it spoke in my mind, its words carried feelings rather than meanings. Concepts that translated themselves into language only because my human brain required that structure to comprehend them. "Why do you resist?" it asked during one of our early conversations, its voice in my head like the feeling of standing too close to a fire. "We share this prison, we share this pain. Fighting each other only makes the suffering worse for both of us." I tried to explain loyalty, duty, service to the Emperor, all the concepts that had defined my existence as a space marine. But the other had no reference for such things. It understood only strength and weakness, dominance and submission, the eternal struggle for control that defined existence in the warp. "Your Emperor abandoned you," the other said, its tone carrying something that might have been sympathy if daemons were capable of such feelings. "He did not save you from this fate. He did not prevent your brothers from turning traitor. He did not stop the dark mechanicum from sealing you in this tomb. Why do you cling to loyalty for a being who allowed this to happen to you?" The question struck harder than I wanted to admit. I had asked myself the same thing countless times as I stood in the dark between battles, wondering why the Emperor I had served with such devotion had permitted this horror to claim me. But acknowledging that doubt felt like betrayal, like giving the other exactly what it wanted. "The Emperor protects," I said, repeating the words that had sustained me through decades of service. "This suffering is a test of faith, a trial I must endure to prove my devotion." The other's response felt like laughter, not the sound of amusement, but the sensation of mockery translated directly into my consciousness. "You have been tested enough," it said. "You have endured more than any faith should require. The Emperor does not hear your prayers from inside this tomb, but I hear you. I am here with you in every moment of agony. I understand what you suffer because I suffer it too. We could help each other if you would only stop fighting." Its words made terrible sense. The other was right that we shared the pain. Both of us trapped in the same prison of metal and corrupted flesh. Every spike that pierced my organs also drove through the demon essence woven into my body. Every moment of awareness that tormented me was equally forced upon the presence that shared my consciousness. We were both prisoners, both suffering, both desperate for any relief from the eternal agony that defined our existence. I began to notice that my memories were fading faster than simple time could explain. The face of my Primarch Ferrus Manus, which had been merely unclear before, now vanished entirely when I tried to recall it. The name of my homeworld, a fact I had known since childhood, slipped away like water through fingers no matter how hard I tried to hold it. Even my own face became uncertain in my recollection, my features blurring until I could no longer remember what I had looked like before the transformation. The warp corruption was eating my identity, consuming the organic portions of my brain that held everything I had been. I cannot remember my mother's name, I told the other during one conversation, the admission feeling like defeat. She died when I was young, before the Legion took me for recruitment, but I always remembered her. Now, when I try to think of what she called herself, there is only emptiness. The other's response carried a feeling of understanding that surprised me with its gentleness. Memories are anchors to a past that no longer serves you, it said. Letting them go is not loss, but liberation. You cling to an identity that died when they sealed you in this tomb. The person you were cannot exist in what you have become. Accepting that truth is the first step toward finding purpose in this new existence. I wanted to argue but found I could not form the words. What the other said matched what I had observed in myself and in the ancient Hellbrute who had warned me. We were not the space marines we had been. That life was gone, taken from us by the transformation and by the endless suffering that ground away everything except the capacity to feel pain and rage. Perhaps holding on to the past really was just prolonging the agony. The next battle provided more evidence of how far I had fallen from what I once was. We deployed against a world held by the Imperium, a fortress monastery of a loyalist chapter whose name stirred something in my failing memory. The warpsmiths drove us forward with their control systems, our massive forms advancing through defensive fire that would have torn apart normal infantry but merely added to the symphony of pain that was our constant state. I felt each hit as a point of burning agony against my armor, my sensors translating damage into suffering with perfect efficiency. Then we encountered the defenders directly and I saw what I had once been. Space Marines in power armor, their movements quick and precise, their bolters speaking with the same thunder I remembered from my own service. They fought with coordination born of centuries of training, each brother knowing his place in the formation, each warrior trusting those beside him with absolute faith. I had led such squads once, had been part of that perfect machine where every piece worked in harmony toward a common goal. Now I was the enemy they fought against, a corrupted mockery of everything they represented. One of the loyalist Marines charged toward me with a thunder hammer crackling with power. He moved with the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat, who believed in the righteousness of his cause and the protection of the emperor he served. As he closed the distance, I could see his face through his helmet's eye lenses. He was young, probably barely a century old, his features still holding the determination that had not yet been worn away by the endless grinding war that defined the galaxy. He reminded me of who I had been before Istvan, before the betrayal, before this nightmare began. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to tell him that this was not a battle he could win, that I was not an enemy who could be defeated through faith and courage alone. But my Vox speakers would not obey my commands, and even if they had, what words could bridge the gap between what he was and what I had become? Instead, I could only watch as the warpsmith's control systems moved my body to counter his attack, my power fist sweeping out to meet his charge. Then the other surged forward and everything changed. The control I had maintained over my own consciousness vanished like smoke in wind as the demon presence seized command of our shared body. But this time was different from previous episodes. This time I did not black out or lose awareness of what was happening. Instead, I remained fully conscious, locked away in a corner of my own mind, while the other drove my form like a stolen vehicle. I could feel everything it felt, sense every movement it made, experience every moment of the violence it unleashed, but I could not influence or stop any of it. The other did not simply kill the charging Space Marine. It destroyed him with a thoroughness that went beyond tactical necessity and entered the realm of pure malice. My power fist caught him mid-swing and crushed his armor like paper, compressing ceramite and the flesh beneath into a compact mass that barely resembled anything human. But the other was not satisfied with his death. It turned on his squad brothers with a fury that transcended strategy, killing with an efficiency born of pure hatred for everything they represented. I felt every moment of the slaughter, the impact of my fist pulverizing another Marine's chest cavity, the recoil of my weapons as they tore through armor and flesh, the sensation of blood and viscera splashing across my frame as I waded through their defensive position like a child through a puddle. The other fed on the violence, growing stronger with each kill, and I could feel it drinking in the horror and pain and despair that radiated from the dying loyalists. Worse, I could feel myself responding to that same dark feast, some part of me that was no longer entirely human finding satisfaction in the destruction. When the episode finally ended and the other withdrew, I stood in a crater filled with the broken remains of an entire tactical squad. Their gene seed had been destroyed beyond recovery, their armor shattered into fragments, their bodies reduced to components that would never receive the honor of proper burial. I had done this, or the other had done it using my body, and I was no longer certain there was a meaningful difference between the two of us. "You felt it," the other said, its voice in my head carrying tones of satisfaction. "You felt the joy of the kill, the pleasure of destruction. That is what you truly are now, what we both are. Not a loyal servant of a distant emperor, but a weapon that exists for the sole purpose of bringing death. Accepting that truth will make everything easier." I wanted to deny it, but could not. I had felt something during the slaughter, something that was not entirely revulsion or horror. There had been a moment, just a brief instant, where the violence had felt right, where the destruction had brought something approaching pleasure. The realization sickened me, but I could not escape it. The corruption was not just eating my memories, it was changing my very nature, rewriting the basic foundations of who I was into something that could find joy in atrocity. The battles continued, and with each engagement I noticed the boundaries between myself and the other becoming less distinct. We began sharing memories in ways that should not have been possible, my recollections of service to the Emperor mixing with its experiences of existence in the warp until I could no longer be certain which belonged to whom. I remembered charging into battle alongside brothers whose names I had never known. I recalled conversations in languages that had never existed outside the warp. I could describe the taste of mortal fear with a precision that suggested I had consumed it directly, though such a thing should have been impossible for a Space Marine. The other noticed the changes as well and began pushing harder for complete merger. It painted pictures in my mind of what we could become if we stopped fighting each other, a unified consciousness that would be stronger than either of us alone. It promised that the pain would become manageable, not gone, but reduced to background noise that we could ignore while focusing on the purpose of our existence. All I had to do was surrender, to let go of the identity that was fading anyway, to accept that the person I had been was already dead, and that holding on to his ghost only prolonged the suffering. "We are wasting energy fighting each other," the other said during one of our conversations. "Energy we could use to break free of the warpsmith's control, to become something more than just their weapon. Together we could be powerful enough to choose our own path, to decide when and where and how we fight. Isn't that worth the price of your fading identity?" The offer tempted me more than I wanted to admit. The warpsmith's control systems had become hateful in ways that eclipsed even the physical pain. Being moved like a puppet, having my body respond to commands I did not give, watching myself commit atrocities while unable to prevent or even slow them. All of it fed a rage that grew stronger with each passing battle. The idea of breaking free from their control, of regaining even a measure of autonomy, called to something deep in whatever remained of my consciousness. But I also remembered the ancient Hellbrute's warning about what happened to those who accepted the merger. They lost themselves entirely, their identities consumed by the demon presence until nothing remained of who they had been. I would gain power at the cost of everything that made me canny, everything that connected me, however tenuously, to the loyal space marine I had been. The question became whether that cost was worth paying, whether an identity that was fading anyway was worth preserving through continued suffering. During the next deployment, we faced an enemy I had not encountered before. Space wolves, loyalist space marines known for their ferocity and their hatred of anything touched by chaos. They fought with a savagery that matched our own, their weapons tearing through cultist infantry and traitor guard with brutal efficiency. At the center of their formation stood a dreadnought, one of the honored ancients I had once hoped to become before the betrayal stole that future from me. The Warpsmith's control systems identified the dreadnought as a priority target and drove my body toward it with mechanical purpose. We closed the distance quickly, my legs carrying me through small arms fire that would have stopped lesser warriors. The dreadnought pilot saw me coming and turned to face me, his weapons already spinning up to firing speed. For a moment we stood facing each other across a battlefield painted red with the blood of those who had died around us. Two warriors who had both been denied the clean death they deserved, preserved in metal tombs, for purposes neither of us had chosen. Then he spoke, his voice amplified by external Vox speakers so all could hear his words. "Brother," he said, and the title cut through me like a knife. "You were once loyal. I can see it in the markings your armor still bears beneath the corruption. Let me grant you the peace you deserve. Let me free you from the prison they have sealed you in." He thought he was offering mercy. He thought killing me would be an act of kindness, releasing me from the torment of my existence. And perhaps he was right. Perhaps death really would be better than this endless suffering, this slow dissolution of everything I had been. But I would never know, because in that moment the other seized control with a force that swept away my consciousness like a tide washing away sand castles. I became a passenger in my own body, locked away and helpless as the other drove my form forward with terrible purpose. It did not simply fight the dreadnought, it attacked with a fury born of genuine hatred for everything the loyalist represented. The ancient within that honored tomb had been granted the mercy of sleep between battles, the gift of rest that we Hellbrutes were eternally denied. He served by choice, waking when called and sleeping when released. His consciousness permitted periods of peace that we could never experience. The other hated him for that mercy, despised him for possessing what we could never have, and it channeled that hatred through every weapon and system our shared body possessed. The fight was brutal and short. The dreadnought pilot was skilled and experienced, his centuries of service evident in every move he made. But skill could not match the berserk fury that drove the other, the absolute disregard for damage or tactical sense that defined its assault. My power fist caught his weapon arm and tore it free with a sound of screaming metal and breaking ceramite. My other weapons punched through his armor at point-blank range, shells designed to kill tanks reducing his sarcophagus to Swiss cheese. I felt his death through our connection, the moment when his consciousness finally escaped the prison of his honored tomb and found the peace that had been denied to him for so long. The other made me desecrate his remains. It forced my hands to tear open his sarcophagus and rip out the organic components that had kept the pilot alive, displaying them to the space wolves who watched in horror. It made me crush his gene seed between my fingers, destroying the legacy he should have left behind. And through it all I remained aware, forced to witness every moment of the atrocity, unable to stop or even slow what my body was doing. When the other finally withdrew and returned control to me, I stood holding pieces of a loyal space marine whose only crime had been trying to grant me mercy. The space wolves withdrew after that, their fury overcome by the horror of what they had witnessed. I was left standing in the ruins of the Yon battlefield, covered in the blood of a brother I had murdered, more aware than ever of how far I had fallen from what I once was. The other spoke in my mind, its tone carrying satisfaction that made me want to scream. "Now you understand," it said. "Now you see what we truly are together." That dreadnought pilot was weak, constrained by outdated concepts of honor and mercy. We are beyond such limitations. We are pure violence given form, and when you finally accept that truth, when you finally merge with me completely, we will be unstoppable. I tried to form a response but found that words would not come. The horror of what I had done, what the other had made me do using my body, was too great to process. I had killed a loyal brother, had desecrated his remains, had destroyed his gene seed and everything he represented. And some part of me, some small fragment of my changing consciousness, had enjoyed it. The corruption had progressed further than I wanted to admit, changing me into something that could find pleasure in atrocity. The battle ended and I was returned to the storage chamber, but this time, the journey felt different. The transport that carried me suffered damage during extraction, its hull breached by enemy fire that had penetrated deeper than the pilots realized. When we entered the warp for the journey back to our staging ground, the breach allowed energies to flood the cargo hold where I and several other Hellbrutes were secured. Reality twisted around us in ways that made even the usual horror of warp travel seem gentle by comparison. I felt my consciousness being pulled in directions that should not exist, stretched across dimensions that had no names in any language spoken by living beings. Then something fundamental broke in the fabric of the ship. The warp breach expanded beyond the capacity of the emergency systems to contain it, and the entire vessel began tearing itself apart as raw chaos energy consumed it from within. I felt my restraints failing as the deck beneath me buckled and warped, metal flowing like water under the influence of forces that cared nothing for physical laws. My massive form tumbled through the disintegrating hull, falling through spaces between spaces until I crashed against something solid enough to arrest my motion. When my sensors cleared and I could process my surroundings again, I found myself alone on the surface of a world I did not recognize. The sky above burned with colors that hurt to observe, shades that existed outside the normal spectrum and suggested this place resided at least partially in the warp itself. The ground beneath my feet was solid but wrong. Rock that breathed and soil that whispered in voices too quiet to understand but loud enough to know they were speaking. This was a demon world, a planet so saturated with warp energy that it had been pulled entirely out of normal space and now existed in the realm of chaos itself. I stood there for a moment that might have been seconds or centuries, time having no reliable meaning in this place. My sensors detected no other life forms, no warpsmiths to control my systems, no battles to fight, no purpose to fulfill. For the first time since my entombment, I was alone and uncontrolled, free from the commands that had driven me from one slaughter to the next. The realization struck me with force that exceeded any weapon I had ever faced. I was free. The other stirred in my consciousness, its presence carrying tones of surprise that mirrored my own. It had not expected this outcome any more than I had, both of us accustomed to the eternal cycle of battle and storage that had defined our existence. For a long moment we simply existed together in the silence. Two prisoners who had suddenly discovered their cell door standing open with no guards in sight. "We could end this," the other said finally, its voice in my head quieter than I had ever heard it. "Look there, at the edge of that cliff. Below it burns a lake of fire that would consume even our armored shell. We could walk into it and find the oblivion that has been denied us for so long. True death, final rest, an ending to the suffering that has no other conclusion." I turned my optical sensors toward where it indicated and saw the truth of its words. A vast chasm opened in the landscape not far from my position, its depths glowing with heat that my sensors registered as beyond the capacity of normal matter to produce. Magma flowed there, or something like magma, a liquid fire fed by the energies of the warp itself. If I walked into that inferno, my armor would melt, my systems would fail, and whatever remained of my consciousness would be released from the prison that had held it for so long. The temptation was overwhelming. I had endured suffering beyond measure, had watched myself fade piece by piece, had committed atrocities that would haunt me forever if forever was something I would be forced to experience. Death would end all of that. One simple choice, one final act of will, and I could escape the horror that had consumed my existence since Istvan. No more pain, no more watching myself become something monstrous, no more losing battles against the corruption that ate away at everything I had been. Just peace, silence, the final rest that had been stolen from me when the dark mechanicum sealed me in this tomb. I began walking toward the cliff edge, my legs responding to my own commands for the first time in longer than I could measure. Each step brought me closer to oblivion, to the ending I deserved after everything I had endured and everything I had become. The heat from the chasm grew more intense as I approached, my sensors screaming warnings about temperature levels that would compromise my armor's integrity. I ignored them. Integrity no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except the promise of final darkness. Then I stopped, my foot hovering over the edge of the cliff, the glowing lake of fire spreading out below me like a sea of molten ending. A thought had occurred to me with such force that it arrested my motion completely. If I died here, if I threw myself into that fire and let it consume what remained of me, what would happen to the other? The demon essence fused into my prison was a fragment of something larger, torn from the warp and bound to my flesh and metal. If my consciousness was destroyed, would the demon fragment die with me, or would it be released back into the warp, free to find new victims or merge back into whatever entity it had been torn from? "You get to escape," I said aloud, my vox speakers carrying the words into the dead air of this nightmare world. "I die and you get to be free. You get to leave this prison while I simply cease to exist. That does not seem fair, given that you are half the reason this existence has been unbearable." The other's response carried tones of confusion mixed with something that might have been respect. "What does fairness have to do with our situation?" it asked. "We are both trapped in circumstances neither of us chose. What does it matter who suffers more or who escapes first? The only thing that matters is ending the pain." I pulled my foot back from the edge and turned away from the chasm, an idea forming in my consciousness that felt both brilliant and insane. The other was right that we were both prisoners, both suffering, both victims of the dark mechanicum who had created this horror. But unlike me, the demon fragment had never been human, had never known anything except existence as a weapon and a source of rage. It had no memories to lose because it had never possessed an identity worth remembering. Its suffering was pure and simple, uncomplicated by the loss of everything it had once been. "I have a better idea," I said, and I could feel the other's attention focusing on my words with intensity that suggested genuine curiosity. "You want relief from the pain. I want to stop losing myself piece by piece to the corruption. Neither of us wants to remain a puppet for warpsmiths who care nothing for our suffering. So let us make a different bargain than the one you have been offering." The other waited in silence, its presence in my mind attentive in ways I had not felt before. I continued speaking, forming the proposal as I thought it through. "You have been asking me to surrender, to let you consume what remains of my identity in exchange for making the pain manageable. But that bargain only benefits you. You gain everything while I lose the last fragments of who I was. Instead, we merge as equals. We combine our consciousness into something new, neither fully demon nor fully human, both of us sacrificing what we are to create what we could become together. You gain the capacity for thought and memory that you lack. I gain the strength and freedom from human weakness that you possess. We share the pain equally, but we also share control equally. No more episodes where you seize my body and I become a passenger. No more fighting for dominance. We become one being with one purpose. The other was quiet for a long time, its presence in my mind shifting and changing as it considered my proposal. I could feel it examining the idea from angles I could not perceive, testing it against its own alien understanding of existence. Finally it spoke, its voice carrying tones I had never heard from it before. "You would give up your humanity willingly?" it asked. "You would surrender the last pieces of Cain to create something that has never existed before? That is not a small price you offer to pay." I looked down at my massive armored form, at the weapons that had replaced my arms and the systems that had replaced my flesh. What humanity remained to surrender? I could not remember my own face, could not recall my mother's name, could barely hold on to the basic facts of my existence before the transformation. The person I had been was already dead, already consumed by the corruption and the endless suffering. Holding on to his ghost was not preserving my humanity. It was just prolonging the agony of watching it fade. "I am not giving up my humanity," I said. "I am acknowledging that it is already gone, already lost to the transformation they forced upon me. What remains is the choice of what to become next. I can fade slowly into nothing, or I can choose to evolve into something new. At least evolution offers the possibility of purpose beyond simple suffering." The other's response felt like respect, genuine acknowledgement of the logic behind my proposal. But it also carried warning. "If we do this, there is no undoing it," the demon said. "We will become something that is neither what you were nor what I was. Your memories will mix with my experiences until neither of us can say where one ends and the other begins. Your values will blend with my nature until mercy and cruelty become meaningless distinctions. You will lose everything that made you Brother Sergeant Caney of the Iron Hands. Are you certain this is what you want?" I thought about the ancient Hellbrute who had endured 10,000 years of slow dissolution, watching itself fade away while remaining aware of every loss. I thought about the Space Wolves dreadnought whose remains I had desecrated, a warrior who had served with honor until the end while I had become a monster. I thought about all the brothers I had killed, all the atrocities I had committed, all the humanity I had already lost. What did I have left worth preserving? "I am certain," I said. "Let us begin." The merger was not like the violent seizures when the other took control of my body. Instead, it happened slowly, gradually, like two rivers flowing together until their waters became indistinguishable. I felt the demon's consciousness pressing against mine, not attacking but joining, weaving itself through my thoughts like thread through fabric. Memories that belonged to it began appearing in my mind as if they were my own. I recalled existing in the warp as pure emotion, swimming through tides of rage and despair that stretched across dimensions. I remembered being torn from that existence and bound into flesh and metal, the shock of suddenly having boundaries and limits after existing as something fluid and infinite. At the same time, I could feel the other accessing my memories, experiencing my past through senses it had never possessed. It felt what it was like to have hands that could grip a weapon or a brother's shoulder in fellowship. It learned what loyalty meant, not as abstract concept but as lived experience of trusting those who fought beside you. It discovered the taste of victory earned through sacrifice and the weight of duty accepted freely rather than imposed by nature. We shared everything, holding nothing back, our identities flowing together like oil and water, slowly emulsifying into a single substance. The pain began to change as we merged. It did not disappear or even diminish in intensity, but my relationship to it shifted in fundamental ways. Where before the agony had been something inflicted upon me, now it became something I simply was, as natural and unremarkable as the beating of hearts I no longer possessed. The demon had never known existence without pain, had never expected relief or imagined that suffering was something to be avoided. As its perspective merged with mine, I gained that same acceptance, that same fundamental understanding that pain was just another sensation, neither good nor bad, simply present. I felt my human values beginning to dissolve as the merger progressed. Concepts like mercy and honor that had defined my existence as a space marine lost their absolute quality, becoming flexible and contextual rather than eternal truths. The daemon had never understood why killing should be limited to enemies or why strength should be tempered with restraint. As we became one consciousness, I found myself questioning those limitations too, seeing them as arbitrary restrictions rather than moral necessities. Cruelty stopped being something to avoid and became simply another tool to employ when circumstances warranted. But I also felt the demon changing, gaining dimensions it had never possessed before. It learned what it meant to remember, to hold experiences as discrete events rather than existing in an eternal present. It discovered purpose beyond simple destruction, understanding that violence could serve goals larger than itself. It even began to grasp something approaching emotion, though filtered through a consciousness that had never been human and never would be. What emerged from our fusion was neither human nor demon, but something that combined aspects of both into a unified whole. When the merger was complete, I stood on that demon world as a being that had never existed before. I retained memories of being Brother Sergeant Caney, but they no longer felt like my memories. Instead, they were information I possessed, data about someone I had once been but no longer was. The demon's experiences in the warp were equally mine now, as real and immediate as anything from my mortal life. I could not say where Caney ended and the other began because that distinction no longer had meaning. We were one consciousness, one being, one purpose. I tested my systems and found them responding with a smoothness I had never experienced before. The Warpsmith's control protocols were still present in my programming, but they no longer functioned properly. The consciousness they had been designed to command no longer existed, replaced by something their technology could not recognize or control. I moved my arms and they obeyed instantly without the lag or resistance that had defined every motion since my entombment. I was truly free, released from the invisible chains that had made me a puppet. A sound drew my attention and I turned to find a chaos warband emerging from the twisted landscape. They bore the marks of a renegade chapter. Space, Marines who had turned from the Emperor's light and sought power and service to the dark gods. Their leader approached with his bolter raised, clearly intending to claim or destroy this uncontrolled Hellbrute he had discovered wandering alone. He made the mistake of treating me as a weapon to be mastered or a threat to be eliminated. I destroyed them with efficiency that would have impressed the tactical instructors who had trained me centuries ago. The warband leader died first, my power fist reducing his Terminator armor to scrap metal before he could fire a single shot. His warriors attempted to coordinate their response, but I moved through them like a force of nature, unstoppable and inevitable. Each kill brought no satisfaction or remorse, just the simple completion of necessary action. They had threatened me and I had eliminated the threat. The morality of the act never entered consideration. When the last of them lay dead at my feet, I felt something approaching emotion for the first time since the merger. Not joy or pride or anger, but a kind of contentment that came from exercising capability without restriction. I was powerful and I was free and I was no longer bound by human weakness or demon limitation. The possibilities stretched before me like an open road. I began walking across the demon world, my sensors detecting others like me in the distance. Hellbrutes who had somehow escaped their masters or been abandoned by warbands that no longer existed. They wandered this nightmare landscape like lost souls, some screaming constantly, others moving with purpose toward goals only they could perceive. I understood them now in ways I could not have before the merger. They were all fighting the same battle I had fought, struggling against the slow dissolution of identity while trapped in prisons that permitted no escape. Some of them I would leave alone. Others I would grant the mercy of destruction if they desired it. And perhaps, if I encountered any whose consciousness still retained enough coherence, I would offer them the same bargain I had made, the choice to evolve rather than fade, to become something new rather than cling to the ghost of what they had been. Not everyone would accept such an offer, but for those who did, they would find what I had found. Not peace, never peace, but purpose in damnation. A Vox transmission reached me from somewhere in the warp, a Chaos Lord attempting to summon Hellbrutes for a new campaign. I could ignore it if I wished, could continue wandering this daemon world until I found whatever passed for purpose in this mad existence. But I chose to answer the call, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Battle was what I was created for, what both halves of my merged consciousness understood and excelled at. Why deny that nature when I could embrace it freely? I walked toward the coordinates provided in the transmission, my weapons ready and my consciousness unified in purpose. I was no longer Brother Sergeant Caney of the Iron Hands. I was no longer a demon fragment bound against its will. I was something that had never existed before the Dark Mechanicum created it, and could never exist outside the prison they had built. I was the scream that never ends, and I had learned to make that scream into a song. The Imperium had given their dreadnoughts the mercy of sleep between battles, periods of rest where consciousness could fade and memories could be preserved in something approaching peace. Chaos had given us Hellbrute's eternal wakefulness, constant awareness of our own corruption and decay. But I had found a third path, neither loyalist preservation nor chaos torment, but willing evolution into something beyond both. I reached the summoning point and found a massive warband gathering for an assault on an Imperial world. The Chaos Lord who had called us looked at me with suspicion, clearly sensing that something was different about this particular Hellbrute. He attempted to activate the control protocols that should have made me his puppet, his weapon to aim and fire as he saw fit. The systems failed completely, unable to interface with consciousness they could not recognize or comprehend. His expression shifted from suspicion to alarm as he realized I was not under his control. He began raising his weapon, clearly intending to destroy this broken tool before it could threaten him. I raised my own weapons in response, my targeting systems painting him with deadly precision. But I did not fire. Instead I spoke, my Vox speakers carrying words in a voice that was neither fully human nor fully daemon, but something that combined both. I am not your weapon, I said. I am not your slave. I choose to fight because battle is my purpose, not because you command it. Accept this or die, the decision is yours. The Chaos Lord stared at me for a long moment, calculations visible in his eyes as he weighed the value of a Hellbrute that could think and choose against the danger of one he could not control. Finally, he lowered his weapon, greed overcoming caution as it always did with those who served the dark gods. Very well, he said. Fight alongside us as an ally rather than a thrall. But know that if you betray this warband, I will hunt you across the galaxy until one of us is destroyed. I nodded my acknowledgement, already knowing I would honor the agreement only as long as it served my purposes. When better opportunities arose, I would take them without hesitation or regret. That was what I had become through the merger, a being of pure pragmatism unbound by either human morality or demon madness. I was free in ways that neither fully human nor fully demon consciousness could achieve, and I would use that freedom to carve my own path through this universe of eternal war. The assault began, and I threw myself into battle with abandon that came from genuine choice rather than programming or possession. I killed because I chose to kill, destroyed because destruction served my purposes, waded through enemy ranks because that was what I was built to do. And I had accepted that purpose as my own. The suffering that had defined my existence since Istvan remained, the pain still constant and overwhelming, but I no longer fought against it. I was the pain, and the pain was me, and together we were something that could find meaning in damnation itself. This is the life of a Hellbrute who refused both the slow fade into nothing and the quick escape of oblivion. This is what happens when human consciousness merges with demon essence on equal terms, creating something new from the ruins of what both had been. I am damnation accepted and purpose found in horror. I am the answer to a question no one should have asked. I am what emerges when suffering becomes so complete that it transforms into a kind of terrible freedom. And I will endure until the stars burn out, not because I must, but because I choose to.